may not know. I've been in Washington, D.C. for the past week. I was at the Festival of Homiletics. 1,700 preachers listening to preachers. It's a real, it's an amazing time. It's one of the things that fills me up in my own ministry. To go hear great preachers preaching. Also gives me a lot of humility because I'm hearing great preachers preaching. It reminds me how much work I have still to do in my own preaching. But I want to tell you a few stories about some things that happened while I was gone. So I went down a couple of days early because I have to fly on a Sunday anyway, so I'd have missed last Sunday's worship just getting there. So my friend Linda and I decided that we're going to go down on Friday because we have the weekend, Friday, Saturday off. We're going to go down Friday and spend Saturday, Sunday touring DC because once we move into the festival on the Monday, we don't get a lot of free time. So we go down and we're doing the Smithsonian museums, and we're just having an awesome time. We did the hop-on, hop-off bus tour, and just kind of we're tourists in town. We had a lot of fun. Met the Swede, Anna, who I made sure was in the country for the Chicago program, and the three of us hung out all weekend. Sunday night, Linda and I are walking from Washington Monument up 14th Street to our hotel. And as we're walking up, it's getting dark. It's late because we've been on the night tour bus, and so it's dark, and we're heading up this road, and this woman comes up to us and says, "Excuse me, but do you know where the Hilton Garden Inn is? We've been in DC like 48 hours. We said, "No, but I know somebody who does." Brought out my phone, Googled it, got Google Maps out, we found the hotel. Just remember, we've not been in Washington more than 48 hours, so I'm not quite sure what's up and what's down on the number counting thing, right? And so we think we found her hotel, and we sent her off. And so she starts wandering away, and 14th Street, well, you go up from the Washington Monument, so it's a bit of a hill. It's not a huge hill, but the bit of the 14th we're on has a bit of a rise at the top of it. And so we get to the top of the rise on this block of 14th, and we discover that actually we sent the woman in the wrong direction. But we're good Canadians. So we walk back down to the crosswalk where we had met her, and we see where she's gone, how far she's gotten. Linda, my friend, is a runner. I held the bags. Linda sprinted after her, running down 14th, and she catches her. And she says to the woman, "I'm really sorry, my friend and I realized that we had read the map upside down on Google Maps, and we really apologize, but you're heading in the wrong direction. And so we wanted to find you." And this woman is like, "Oh, thank you so much." Like, "Oh, thank you, thank you." And so they walk back, and now we're feeling very responsible for this woman because we sent her in the wrong direction. And so we walk her to her hotel, basically, because heaven forbid I get this woman lost in DC again, right? We get to this woman's hotel, and we're saying goodbye, and she's just like, it's just this beautiful southern accent, which I will not in any way attempt to copy. But she says things like, "Thank you, you've restored my faith in humankind. You just don't see this kind of generosity anywhere else in the world." And I'm like, "Where the heck are you from?" Yeah. And she says, "I'm from a small town, and I've never really been to DC before, yada yada yada." And so we're saying goodbye to her, and I said, so she says, "What are you in town for, ladies?" We said, "Oh, we're here at the Festival of Homiletics." I went right over her head. She had no idea what that word meant, which most people don't. And so she's like, "Oh, okay, well, have a great time." And she says, she said, "Do you ever go to Nashville?" Well, the festival goes to Nashville. And we said, "Yeah, occasionally." She said, "Well, if you're ever in Nashville, I would really like you to look me up because I want to repay your kindness." And we're like, We ran a block and a half after this woman, like for crying out loud, you'd think we'd given her a kidney. And she hands us her business card. And she is the Republican she is a Republican, and she is the Speaker of the House of Tennessee. She said if we were ever in Nashville and we want anything, we'd go straight to her office. I then went, later in the week, some of you may or may not know, I'm personal friends with the writer Diana Butler-Bass. Some of you probably read some of her work. Well, Diana and I are personal friends. And so she was giving a 2-hour lecture, and she's talking about her new book, and its title is Grateful. And she talks in her book, if you've read the book, I don't know if any of you, we're going to probably do it as a book study in the fall, but in her book, she begins the book by talking about that excruciating, painful moment in all of our childhoods when our parents made us write thank you cards. We all remember that moment, right? You get the present at Christmas and you're all excited, or you get the present at your birthday, and 24 hours later, Mom's got the paper and the envelopes in front on the dining table, and you are not going anywhere until those thank you cards are written. And Diana talks in her book, Grateful, about this kind of sense of obligation to give thanks to her. She talks in particular about a thank you card to her grandmother. And she says, you know, this obligation to say thank you for a gift. And how hard it was to write that thank you note. And we've all been there, right? Like, you know, gotta write the thank you cards. Thank you cards they're not part of our kind of everyday culture anymore. Like, I'm still waiting a thank you card for my niece for doing her wedding and buying her a present last year. No, it was actually 2 years ago. How we say thank you is often based on how we're raised. It's the culture we live in, it's the experiences we have of being thanked. What was funny about the experience in DC with this woman was, you know, other than she was a little over the top, was I felt sorry for her. Like, has no one ever done anything minorly kind to this poor woman ever? You know, Linda ran a block and a half, and not very fast. You know, we were feeling guilty because we'd sent her the wrong direction. We were hoping she wouldn't, like when we found out who she was, we were hoping we weren't going to end up being deported. Oh, by the way, she was going to meet Trump the next morning. That's why she was in town. Now we were thinking maybe we shouldn't have. Well, actually, while we were praying, I know where all your heads just went. If we hadn't helped her. Actually, what we prayed for that night was that sign of human kindness would actually be influential in her meeting the next morning with probably one of the most powerful men in the world. We hoped she would keep that little bit of gratitude in her heart when she went to see the President of the US. But the other thing I found really interesting about that whole experience is we were in the town where no one does anything for anybody without there being a payback. No one, it seems, when we watch the rhetoric on, oh, by the way, 24-hour television down there, news was just driving me crazy. Like, it's way more channels than we get. It was a bombardment. But it was really obvious when you watch all of that just how much this town in America, the city in America, runs on a gratitude. But it's a gratitude of obligation. So I do something for you knowing that one day I'm going to cash a favor in and you're going to do something for me. And it seems like when we ran into Beth, who was the woman who got lost, that was the mentality she entered into this negotiation with us. That as far as we were concerned was not a negotiation, but rather us making up for our really idiotic mistake of sending her in the wrong direction. We were tempted at one point while we were having a conversation with her saying, we're from Canada, people do this all the time. But it struck me how much this city ran on not gratitude but obligation. And then when I was listening to my friend Diana speak about her new book, how much our lives often run on an understanding that gratitude is actually a contract, a negotiation, I can't even say the Latin anymore. But that, you do something for me, I do something for you. That's the way it has to be. All right? And then you read this piece from Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. And we realize that our whole lives should be places of gratitude. Because the greatest gift we've been given, grace, the grace of God, is absolutely something none of us have earned. None of us have earned that. Not me, not you, not the President of the United States, not the Prime Minister of Canada, not the Queen, no one. Not one of us in this world has earned or deserves God's grace. That's the reality of our lives. And yet, Paul tells us in this letter to the Corinthians that God's grace is abundant and freely given to every one of us. And none of us could possibly give anything back that could outdo it or even measure against it as a thank you. There's nothing. How do you thank God for the grace that God bestows into our lives? And grace sometimes, I'm so taken with this interchange with this woman in DC that when I think about grace, because you see, she got really excited about something really, like as far as Linda and I were concerned, was pretty small, right? It was a pretty small thing to go chasing after her and telling her we'd screwed up, And I realized that so often when we're thinking of God's grace, we think way too big. We think, it's a miraculous healing for something, or it's, an abundance of wealth. It's things that are fairly tangible to us. And I did ask for permission to say this, so just let you know. I'm reminded, when I think of grace, I'm often reminded of Glenn Hill, who's a member here. And I did speak to Joe, and I did ask for permission for this. And one of the things that always filled me with hope around faith and God was that when I would ask Glenn how he was doing, even when he was sick, when I asked Glenn, he goes, "I'm looking at the right side of the grass, Karen." He was saying, and that was his expression of thanks for the grace that he was still alive and the grace that he was amongst us and amongst his family. I'm still looking at the right side of the grass. And I wonder about that. I wonder about whether we take enough time to be thankful to God. We can be really thankful to God when, if there had been a major, if we'd majorly flooded in Chilliwack the other week there, I know some people were really badly affected, but if we'd had a major flooding of Chilliwack, I can guarantee you this place would be full. Because people would be running to the church, either to pray for the flooding to go or to offer thanksgiving. But 6 weeks down the road, the place would be back to this. Right? I experienced that in the forest fires of 2003. In 2003, we did not have enough room in our church to accommodate everybody immediately after the fires when we all came home, because everyone was so grateful to God that God had saved them. 6 weeks later, we're back down to me and the mice. Because we tend not to see the grace of God in our everyday life. We tend not to see grace of God in the very small pieces of who we are and our ability to live. Because we have gotten to a place, and I think it's a cultural thing, and I think, in some ways it's infiltrated in through the walls of the church, that we're only understanding ourselves blessed by God when we're in perfect health and are abundantly rich materially. And we don't see the grace of God in the more intangible things of our lives. When my mom died a few years ago, I was deeply grateful that it's 2 phone calls and I'm on a plane and everything's dealt with here. Not knowing what I was going to see on the other side of the plane. In fact, Mom died while I was on flight. We were hoping to be there in time for her still being alive. And getting there, knowing I was the executor of my mom's will, that I didn't know how long I'd be stuck in Scotland dealing with my mom's stuff, my mom and dad's stuff. But knowing and being deeply grateful that it all went on without me. And when I came home, being deeply grateful some days that I had enough strength to get out of bed. Because I'd lost both my parents within 4 years. And in the process, I'd also gone through a divorce. And so the idea that I could actually get out of bed some days was the most thankful thing I had. And we tend not to see God's grace in those places, but I actually think that's where God's grace is deepest in our lives. When we can get up out of bed despite our lives, despite what's going on, that we can actually put one foot in front of another and walk to work, or go to the store, or drive our vehicles, or see a friend. That's actually, I think, where God's grace is the deepest into our lives, and we experience it most. It's not in the places where it's quite obvious that there's joy and celebration, like when we survive a flood or a fire or a serious illness or something, but rather that God's grace is most deeply seen in the hard parts of our lives. And that the response of thank you is actually an acknowledgement of that without us struggling to try and outdo God on how good we are about stuff, or how good we are at saying thank you. And that our thanks comes with a certain type of humility. And it's a humility like this. One of the things I did when I was in DC last week was I went to the Holocaust Museum. Has anyone ever gone to DC to that Holocaust Museum? It's hard. It's a hard place. I haven't cried about it yet because I can't, because I'm still hurting. But there's a special tour you take. You go up to the 4th floor and then you walk your way through basically the rise of nationalism in Germany in the 30s into which becomes Nazism, which becomes the ghetto, which becomes the program of ghettos, which becomes Kristallnacht, and you're walking down, by the way, as you do this, Kristallnacht, which becomes the concentration camps, and then eventually you end up in liberation. And we're getting into these elevators to go up, so it's very, so you get in the elevator on the tour to go up to the beginning of the memorial. And this elderly gentleman is, pushing us all into the elevator, and he gives this little speech. He says, thank you for coming to Washington and to the memorial, to this memorial. And, it is a memorial to those who have died, for the 6 million plus people, not only the Jews, but the LGBT community, the Romani community, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the conscientious objectors, the political opponents, all who died at the hands of the Nazis. All of these innocent people. And he says, so we think, so we want you to treat it with great respect. No running, no loud noises, please keep no flash photography. Kind of the usual rhetoric you would get from a museum that is taking very good care of its exhibit. And just before the doors close, he says, and I thank you for coming as the child of survivors of Auschwitz. And the doors closed, and the elevator took us upstairs. And I realized that here was a man who was thanking us, a bunch of tourists, for coming to this place. He wanted nothing in return from us. It was a grace-filled moment. He was gracefully thanking us for being here. We could not top that Thanksgiving. We were not expected to top it. We were not going to write thank you letters at the end of the tour and say thank you very much for. We couldn't. It was a moment of grace. It was a beautiful moment of grace. And it reminded me when I was reading this piece from Paul that entering into our grace-filled relationship with God is like that. It is entering in with a sense of humility. That there is nothing we can do to top the sacrifice that God has made for us, and we shouldn't try, but simply accept it and take it out into the world, to act upon it, to not simply sit around and say, well, God gave me grace, I'm all right, but to act upon it. Just as this man was acting out his grace. I'm going to talk lots more about being in Washington. I'm going to talk about some of the sermons I heard, some of the lectures I went to. But I wanted you to think about these ideas of grace, humility, thankfulness. That God's grace comes to us not because we deserve it, but because God loves us. And that our job is to take that grace into the world with great thanksgiving, to celebrate it, to shout it from the rooftops, to sing about it heartily, not as the frozen